All right. Well, I know people will still continue to join. Thank you all for joining today and attending. If you are seeking to understand to identify project red flags in 15 minutes with desktop environmental reviews, you are in the correct place. My name is JJ Walter. I'm a senior client success specialist here at Pivvot. I will be moderating this webinar today. Just so you all know, the video and mics and chat functionality have been disabled. But if you have any questions that you want to ask, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. I'll be moderating that throughout, but we'll also save time for Q&A at the end of this webinar. Again, thank you very much for joining. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, Ben Browning. Ben is a staff scientist at Terracon. For those of you who may not know, Terracon is the parent company of Pivvot, but Pivvot is kind of a wholly owned or a subsidiary of Terracon, not wholly owned, but we are a subsidiary of that. So that's the connection there. To let you know a little bit about Ben today. Ben is an environmental scientist based in Terracon's Louisville, Kentucky office. He's over 5 years experience in environmental and geospatial analysis, specializes in conducting routing studies and identifying environmental and engineering concerns for large-scale projects. His work has spanned more than 6,000 miles of corridor analysis and countless acres of land, supporting clients across the digital infrastructure, commercial development, power generation, and mitigation banking sectors. He holds a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Kentucky and a master's degree in environmental science, as well as a graduate certificate in geographic information systems, GIS, from Marshall University. So thank you very much, Ben, for joining us today. I'm going to hand it off to you. And again, for our listeners today, if you have any questions, feel free to just go ahead and click on that Q&A and submit your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, JJ. Welcome, everybody. So like JJ said, we're going to talk about how to ID red flags in about 15 minutes with desktop environmental reviews. So I'll walk us through what an environmental review on a desktop looks like, the good old-fashioned way that these have been done for a while, some of the issues with those additional ways, and some active ways that we can do this kind of desktop review, why it's important, and then give us some real examples of how that's done and the kinds of red flags we can ID, and then some potential solutions for those as well. So let's start with what a desktop environmental review is. So this is a service to identify environmental and historical resources that could be on your project site in your project area to determine field requirements to continue your project life cycle and identify what permits you may need, what resources you may need to avoid, what kind of regulatory compliance may be involved, making sure that you are in compliance. And you want to do all of this to avoid project delays. A lot of these things can really hold up a project. I'll show some examples of why. And red flag awareness. So starting on the desktop before anybody even puts boots on the ground is just really helpful. So you know what you need to be looking for when you're actually out in the field. And so you can include these potential concerns in your project schedule. So we like to describe everything in the project lifecycle at Terracon. So these desktop environmental reviews come in either during the site selection stage of the project lifecycle or into the design and mitigation timeline on the project lifecycle. So here's some examples of environmental red flags that may occur on a project. Wetlands and streams are a very common one across the nation. Being within the 100-year floodplain as well may lead to floodplain permitting that's required. Interacting or building on an area with historic structures, constructing in an area with karst features with potentials for sinkholes, disturbing Indian religious sites, archaeological concerns, disrupting threatened endangered species habitat, migratory birds, eagles, or building on federal or tribal land all of these are a red flag. These can lead to delays and additional surveys that may be required for a project. And the list just keeps going. But so I'll give 2 examples of how some of these things can impact your project timeline. So if you are going to need to impact a stream or a wetland, this could lead to a 3 to 18 month permitting timeline, depending on the severity of the impact, if it's able to be avoided, how much stream or wetland that you are impacting, and could lead to possible redesigns or additional mitigation costs for these impacts. So identifying it early is very important, so we can make sure you don't have to delay your project 3 to 18 months. Same thing if you are impacting endangered species habitat. I've got a bat up here because I'm based out of Kentucky, and there is a variety of endangered species of bats in our area. We have to make sure we're not impacting their habitat. This can lead to 3 to over 12 months of permitting time and species reviews, especially for bats, because there's time of year restrictions for surveys. So understanding what endangered species may occur on your site, threatened species as well, or the habitat that may exist on your site early on is very important, just to make sure that you can check these boxes off, make sure it's not a concern. And if it is a concern, to get in front of it early in your project lifecycle. So a traditional desktop review involves jumping to a variety of online databases, looking at several different government records, historical documents, and going through aerial photos. So you'll be jumping between a variety of different websites. This can lead to delays, especially right now with the government shutdown. A lot of these websites are unavailable. So you can do that either through the individual websites of the government or use a location intelligence software. So that is your Google Earths, your ArcPros, Pivvot, and these are tools to visualize spatial data where we can combine data from multiple sources, for example, these different federal and state databases, so we can produce maps and figures and help spatially analyze these resources against our project areas to determine environmental concerns and engineering concerns. So some issues with the common way, the traditional way to do these desktop reviews is data quality. A lot of this information has to be downloaded. If you're downloading it, once every month, there may be a update. Some people are not updating it once a month. Anyways, there may be an update to these databases. So when you do these reviews, if you haven't downloaded the latest data set, you may be missing some critical data that's out there. It takes a lot of time to run through all these different sites. A lot of them go down like they're down right now, which can lead to a delay that's hard to pick back up and stay on your project timeline. There's a lot of unutilized or underutilized data sources out there that people don't review. It's wonderful data that can help identify concerns on your site. We'll go through a few of those examples. And then it can be difficult to visualize this data, overlaying from different data sources if you don't have the right tools. So we'll talk about how we can use Pivvot to address a lot of these issues. And the goal with Pivvot is to help incorporate environmental data into our siting of a project, and to help during the design stage as well, to predict what site studies may be necessary earlier in your project lifecycle, with greater accuracy of where these concerns may be, and with better clarity, using multiple data sets to kind of verify if the severity or risk of these concerns existing on a site. And with Pivvot, we're able to take all these databases and do this at a very large scale as well, where if you're working on the scale of hundreds of miles or hundreds of acres of land, this can be a really time-consuming progress traditionally. So to address data quality and time issues, Pivvot refreshes its data sources regularly, depending on the federal and state databases. They're updated either on a monthly or a bi-monthly set. There's over 530 data sources at federal, state, local, and private levels, with over 280 million records. And all this data will be clipped to the site boundaries that you import. So it's a lot of data that you're looking at. If you are a GIS user like myself, trying to incorporate large data sets like this and overlay them can fry a computer and really slow down this process. So it's nice that it cuts down to just the areas you are interested in. So this is a wall of text. You don't need to read all of this. I just wanted to show the broad categories that we have of important data to review. And it's a lot, as you can see. Each one of these layers is just a amalgamation of other data sources grouped together. And I'm going to talk about the ones that we have highlighted here and why these are important to review and how you can review them quickly as a desktop review. So the first three here are geotechnical data sources, a lot less likely to be looked at by a biologist like myself, but really important to consider when you're looking at a site. We want to look at depth of bedrock. If you have a shallow bedrock in an area and you're expecting to have to excavate or do a large cut to get your ground ready for construction, this can lead to really high excavation costs. If you have shallow bedrock, you're going to have to blast or burrow through. Identifying areas of karst topography, like these are dramatic examples and severe red flags that we have pictured here. But you can lead to sinkhole and flooding risks in a karst area. And a lot of karst features are used by threatened endangered species, such as bats, as habitat as well. So it can be kind of a two-for hazard there. Additionally, looking at the Sergo Web Soil Survey hydric soils mapping and overlaying that with the traditional NWI wetlands federal database to identify potential wetlands that may be of concern for construction. Another really fun layer I like and is a great example of underutilized resources is a layer Pivvot's put together called land ownership potential conflicts. It's an amalgamation of federal and state GIS repositories. There's well over 100 of them for all 50 states just grouped together. And it lists off a variety of potential concerns that people may overlook often when they're looking to either find a property or when they're starting to design on a property. For example, mines, either existing or active or closed mines, natural heritage sites, conservation easements that may be at a state or federal level on some land. Other examples are cemeteries that may be on site, and just if the land is owned by a state or federal entity that may have some additional permitting requirements to impact. And Pivvot cites all their sources when you're looking at this data. So we have this image here is just a mess of data sources and data sets, but you can go through and click on these in the Pivvot interface, read what the resource is, and then where it's getting that data from. Some other underutilized sources that are really important to check when you're doing these environmental reviews, and we can do quickly, is presence of communication towers on your site. Bald and golden eagles, which are federally protected, use these commonly as nesting sites. This image here is one from Terracon, a nest they actually spotted. And we have to make sure that we're not going to impact that. And if it's being habitated actively, that can be a concern and cause some real restrictions on development. Same thing with cemeteries. There are federal, state, and local protections that vary across the country. We really don't want to impact those. They can really slow down a project if you have anything remotely around a cemetery. Even if it's not going through the cemetery, there's still risk of bodies that were buried outside of the known boundaries. And then federal registered sites, so our contaminated sites, our underground storage tanks, knowing if there's a risk of damaging one of those or hitting those during construction. I've seen a variety of times where people get into construction, they are excavating and they smack a underground storage tank, and that can be a huge holdup on a project, especially if the tank still holds petroleum products or some other chemicals. It's busted open, and now we have a hazardous waste cleanup that we have to add to the whole list of tasks in a project. So I'm going to run through a couple of examples. So this first one is just a large public land piece in Kentucky, where I'm from. And the blue boundaries here are the boundaries of this parcel. It's kind of a weird shape. It makes it a really good example. And we're going to pretend like we're looking for potential areas for solar development. And we can do this really quickly. We've got on our right side a variety of criteria Pivvot can use to identify areas we don't want to build in. And then it's going to highlight in purple areas that are usable based off this criteria. So some call outs I want to make on our list here, other than the setbacks, is our slope. We have put our slope that we think for our solar development. We can only build on areas or prefer to build on areas that are a 10% or less slope. Additionally, we want areas that are at least 5 acres wide. If they're smaller, we're going to exclude that. It just won't be economically feasible to develop. in this circumstance, and we want to have some setbacks from our boundaries. We're starting off with 214 acres we want to look at. So we put in this criteria, we hit calculate, and Pivvot highlights 3 big areas on this site that it sees as usable that are greater than 5 acres for a accumulated 55 acres of usable area. And so what it's telling us is these are going to be areas with where we're minimizing our environmental permitting based off of a lot of these setbacks. So now we're going to zoom into each one and show how quickly we can identify some hazards on these sites, or some red flags on these sites, and discuss what each of them is. So we've got 3 different spots highlighted here. Our topmost one is a power line that's running across the site, and it's excluding that portion to the northwest of it because of the power line intersecting it. So we already know there's a power line. We need to add it to our list if we're going to get out to the site for any kind of survey. Let's see how high that power line is. Is it going to be a construction hazard? Will it be feasible for us to use the other side of that power line? If we can get our equipment under there, is there some kind of restricted easement under the power line and around it? We need to do some research. So we've already found that out. And that may add some additional acreage if we're able to get past that. So we can add that to our list of items we need to look at while we're in the field. Our next hazard here is this red hatching. This is the 100-year FEMA floodplain. So you're going to construct in that area, or you're going to grade it up. You're going to have to go through a FEMA floodplain process of permitting that impact, making sure you're not going to affect the floodplain for folks downstream of you. And if you're going to build a structure within the FEMA floodplain, and you're going to need flood insurance, that can be a major factor as well. And then we have at the bottom here, highlighted in like a cyclic green, a pond that is being recognized by the federal dataset NWI wetlands as a wetland. So if we think our construction is going to go anywhere close to that, we would want to make sure we do a wetland delineation to make sure we're not actually impacting the boundaries of that wetland. Because with all federal data sets, their estimations, they are not 100% accurate. So you would like to ground truth these items to make sure you're not impacting them. It could lead to additional permits and slowdowns on your construction timeline. And then we see our purple square along the east side here is missing some little squares along it. That's where Pivvot saw the slope was greater than 10% and excluded that from our area. But when you go in and look at it, it's like, well, we don't really know what that slope is. Maybe when we get out there, we can see if it's a little more subtle, or if grading would be a feasible ability to pull those areas back into our acreage. So then this is the same site, just the western section of that weird shape. What we see here is a big usable area in an active ag field, but it's cut off from the rest of our site by a stream that we can see identified on NWI wetlands and the floodplain. So we may have some access issues if we're going to use this existing pathway, but it looks like there's not any issues from access by the adjacent landowner. So this is a good opportunity to get to know your neighbors, see if maybe we could work out an agreement with the adjacent landlord to access this part of the property, or if we do need to consider some impacts to cross the stream. And if we are going to consider those, that's totally fine, but let's get ahead of the curve and start that process early so we don't have project delays. And the final section is the southern section of that odd shaped parcel. We have a different background on this just to show. You can see a fine brown hatching across the whole site, and in our little table over here, it's telling us that we're in a karst topography area, so we're at risk of karst features. This is areas like limestone rock that is at risk of forming sinkholes or other kinds of karst pockets underground. So like we said earlier, that could be a risk of sinkholes that could damage foundations, lead to excavation issues and construction issues. But we may also have a risk of endangered species habitat if we're in the range for bats that needs to be considered. We have some weird patches here excluded out of our purple area from the fact that they're greater than 10% slope. We know to add that into our checklist when we're hitting the site if we get out there to make sure if we need to really exclude that or if it's gradable. And we know maybe we need to do some geotechnical investigations to determine if it is gradable, or if we're going to hit shallow bedrock easily, we could overlay our depth of bedrock to look into that. Additionally, we could see Citation Boulevard's the major road in this area, and this section of usable land is not accessible without crossing a stream in a floodplain. So we know we need to consider that immediately if we're going to consider this area for construction. So this map here is the same section we were just looking at, but we have it back to aerial, and we're looking at a few other layers to quickly identify some red flags. And I think this is a very good example of why it's nice to have these underutilized resources or data sources too. So we have our NWI wetlands, the federal database for wetlands on the map. It's those blue lines we see crossing the map, showing us where our streams are likely located. And then overlaid on that is the Web Soils Survey hydric soils map. So hydric soils, just say they're soils that have a good potential of being wetlands or forming wetlands. So I overlay these two while we're scouting this area for a client. I see that it's not identified as a wetland on the NWI wetland map, but we can zoom in and we see Farmer Joe is not farming a good section of this area right above where a stream starts up gradient. You can see a significant color change in the grass and vegetation that grows out of that area. Likely, farmer's not farming that because his tractor's sinking into that area. It's probably a good likelihood that's a wetland just based off looking at this map and the data that we have. So if we think this area, it's in our usable area, as we saw in our purple map there before. So it's in the north end there. We probably want to get out there and do a wetland delineation to determine if it is a jurisdictional wetland, and then identify those boundaries to see if they're going to fall in our project footprint. Then we can determine from there if we need to do redesigns, if we need to permit for impacts. And then once we determine that, get started on that so we can make sure that is not a delay on our project timeline. And we can include that into the cost of this project. So we identified a pretty good red flag really quickly there with just looking at two separate layers. So here's another example. This is just a screen cap right out of a Pivvot of a potential fiber route. So this is about 13 miles of proposed cable. Client is unsure how they're going to install this, if they're going to bury it with a directional bore or a trench. Are they going to install it on aerially on new poles or co-locate on old poles? And no assessments have been done. So we have no ground data collected for this project yet, but we can still identify a bunch of red flags. So we make sure that we go and check these areas out and make sure they're on our checklist of field surveys, so we don't have any project delays. So this is a zoom in of the central portion of that fiber route. We have some of our routes are in purple, red, and yellow on this. Our little polygons, the little linear polygons, are the NWI wetlands layer we've been talking about. It says that there's a linear wetland. It's likely another stream that's coming across this site. It looks like it goes through a culvert under the road, and then it directly crosses our potential fiber route. So this immediately throws up a red flag. If you impact a wetland, that's another permit. Impact a stream, that's another permit in process we have to go through. So before we even touch the ground, we've identified that, and then we can already start to problem solve before we even start. We can try to recommend install methods to avoid this impact. We could directionally bore under the stream. We could, put aerial cable in and put the poles outside of our stream. Or if we're at risk regardless, and we may not be able to do this, we can scope these specific areas for wetland delineations. So we can tell our field teams, hey, let's go hit these specific locations off the road and delineate to make sure that we can install poles safely outside of the area or safely directionally bore outside of the area of these wetlands, rather than sending a biologist out to blindly survey the entire length of this 13-mile project. We can give him some hotspot locations to focus on and save a lot of time and money. This is a rather small project, 13 miles, but I do this for thousands of miles of projects. So a way we can quickly identify these in Pivvot is tell it to make us a little spreadsheet of all these crossings. The little example we have down here is just all the wetland crossings. Pivvot could do this for all of its different data sets. If you look where we have the rightmost red flag where it says distance from center line, and our leftmost crosses center line, what it's telling us is our center line, which is our fiber cable in this case, is crossing some riverine wetlands, so some streams, and it's not crossing some freshwater wetlands. But if we look at distance from center line, it's pretty close to that wetland and that stream. So, like I said, these federal databases aren't exact. They could really be crossing them, and it'd be really good to get out there to verify that we are or are not impacting them, and that our equipment is not going to be in the wetland when we're doing our installs and continuing our projects. Having these areas highlighted for construction to avoid impacts early on before someone gets out there and sinks their truck into a wetland, gets it stuck, and causes some unnecessary impacts. We can also visualize these resources really well. Everybody works better on a visual. So what we have here is a lot of different data sources overlaid on each other. We've got our fiber route we were looking at. We have splayed it out to have a little corridor around it. So that'd be where you're bringing in your construction equipment. And then we can see if we're going to potentially impact some resources. I have these as yellow flags in the two areas it's pointing at. Some of it is federal land, some is land ownership potential conflict. I think in this case, the example's a conservation easement. We see our project is right on the boundary of these locations. If this is just design level data, we can bring this data back to the designers and see if we can just inch it over. Maybe it's on the right side of the road, we move it to the left, and now we're avoiding those resources, and they shouldn't be a problem anymore. And if we know that's unfeasible for this case, then at least we know who we need to get in contact with and coordinate with. We know we have federal land. It'll identify what those federal entities are, and we can start our coordination with them to make sure we do everything correctly and stay within our project timeline. We can also see in green here wetlands that we're crossing, identify those early on, and like I said before, recommend install methods to avoid them. And we have a large set of orange triangles marking off areas that are in the National Register of Historic Places. So that red flag immediately is telling us we probably need to get an archaeologist involved to make sure we're not going to impact historic resources. Yes, Section 106 review, possibly. So lots of data. It's a lot of different things to look at. It's very handy when you can color code them, turn things on and off, and then overlay them to see, are there potential areas we can avoid simply so we don't have to go through this permitting process. I've been talking a lot about public data sets, but we can pull in data as well. If you already have, data you've already paid somebody to get out and do some surveys, or if you've done some geotechnical studies, we can pull that data back into Pivvot, overlay it with all these other sources and your project, and quickly identify red flags based off that data you've already collected. Kind of adds in some additional value through the project lifecycle. So if we've used this data to select a site, and then we use that to identify what field studies we need to do, we collect that field data, we can bring it back, overlay it back in Pivvot, and then do another quick review of this data and our site to see if we're now avoiding that hazard based off the field data we collected, if it is feasible to do a redesign to avoid it, or if we need to consider getting a permit. And same thing, we can quickly reevaluate redesigns for new red flags. So if we are going to move, for example, here, some of our routes around or our project area, we can see if that shift is going to make us overlap with another environmental concern rather quickly. So to end, there's a lot of different red flags that we can identify on a desktop survey. We've got a lot of them listed here in this nice visual. Some potential solutions when you identify these red flags before we even hit the site is to evaluate the possibility for redesigns to avoid these constraints. If not, then make sure that we get it in our project timeline to coordinate with regulators. Make sure that's not going to be a delay on our project. That's a common mistake, is just getting coordination conducted early on. That's never a fast process, so we want to get started as early as possible. And to make sure that we start these site assessments early in the project timeline so we have good data to back up these permits and coordination efforts. I've got my contact info at the top here. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And we have Rob Hernandez as well, who is an expert in Pivvot as well. So I'll turn it over to JJ now, and we can talk about any questions we received during this presentation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ben. That was wonderful. Yeah, so as I mentioned, for those who have questions, covering statements, or thoughts or anything like that, since we don't have the chat functionality open, feel free to post into that Q&A button, whether you have any questions. But yeah, I think overall this has been great information. Uh, you know, Curious to know from you all in terms of, you can reach out to us afterwards. Like, how is this helpful? How can we help you kind of assist in finding those red flags? Um, what are some of the ways that you've done it in the past? In terms of pulling all the data sets and things like that. So again, even if not now, I'm just curious how you all kind of handle those things. I'll also say too, because Ben had noted that Pivot is continually updating all those data sets on generally a 30 to 60 day cycle. So we're always making sure we get the latest and greatest. And I want to just point out that unfortunately we're in the start of a government shutdown at the moment. Some agencies may still be producing data, some may not be, but part of that updating schedule is by getting all the latest and greatest, you can trust that we've got the latest that the government has put out so that, if there is a government shutdown, if it lasts a little bit longer and there's a delay in getting updates to those, at least we've already grabbed kind of the latest and greatest. And again, that's for ones where we've gotten it from the federal government. We actually source our data sets from numerous sources so we can kind of pull it all together. But again, go ahead and put in the Q&A any questions. I do see that there's a question about pricing options. As you might imagine, I'm not going to get into exact pricing options now. Definitely reach out to Rob Hernandez there to get into that. What I will say is that you know, we've managed it so that there's easy ways to get in. So if you just want to find out the information, know what these red flags are, pull quick reports, understand your project sites very early on, very quickly. We have a product called Aware that is just meant to do exactly that. It's a pretty simple SaaS interface, software as a service, and you can go in, look at all these data sets, download these data sets, pull a lot of the reports that Ben was displaying so that you just have an idea of what's there and what are those potential red flags. All right, so that's an easy introduction. And then we have another application product called Citing, which just gets more into depth of like seeking out the parcels, calculating usable area and things like that. And some of Ben's pictures were from the Citing. So it's really dependent on your use case, how much you want to use the functionality for. So instead of just mentioning pricing, we really would want to have a conversation to understand what you're trying to get at so that you're not winding up with something you don't need. So hopefully that's helpful. Question, is there a database for identifying locations of water supply wells? I do know that we have our well data sets, going back to the data set. So there's that potential. So where it's possible. Ben, do you have any other suggestions in terms of I know they're talking about water supply wells. I know we have in other things of like be it depth of water and things like that, but any
Yeah,
thoughts there?
we have a couple data sources that can identify water sources. Additionally, if you are interested in like a particular data source, like Sean's question below, I'll kind of group these two together. Pivot keeps a really nice data dictionary, it's what they call it. So we can actually go and search all the databases that they're referencing, and we can make sure that we're like including data sources that are important for your projects. And like I said before, if there is a data source that is not being included, we're able to upload data as well. to overlay for your particular project. So if there's a particular city or county data set that Pivot is not utilizing currently, we could still overlay that data in Pivot with your project. And additionally, Pivot is constantly adding new data sources. JJ can probably give you some better information on those. So we're continuing there. Pivot is continually including new data sources to reference for our reviews.
So thanks, Ben. Another question, is Pivot only client driven, or can it be used essentially to help others with their clients? So no, we're not just client driven in terms of you have to be the client of Pivot to get any information. By all means, whether you are working directly with Pivot to utilize this data, or you are working in a perhaps consulting capacity to kind of gather some of this information that you then can like utilize in your conversations with your clients, that's definitely possible too. So there again are lots of options in that realm.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in getting assistance with providing suitability mapping, please reach out to me and we can work out and talk about that further.
There's a question, does Pivot use local sources, city and county data? I can answer, or you can answer, Ben?
You can answer. I kind of touched on that earlier, saying that it kind of depends on what city and what county. And we can look at the data dictionary to see if we have that level of data already in there. And if Pivot's not already utilizing it, we can, import data sources as well, specific data that you'd like to look at for a project.
Yeah, and so yeah, it really depends on the data sets, the data layer. We'll pull federal sources if possible, but we'll also compare those to sometimes state or local. So it just kind of depends on where we can get the best data, how we can pull it together, the process for doing so. As Ben noted, our data dictionary, which does require, to be able to view that, does require you have Pivot access first. But within our data dictionary, we'll always give the source of that data. So sometimes it might be one entity like USGS. Other times it might be a number of sources from which we've actually compiled those and made sure the attributes and all the different data sets align before we then publish it, so that the end user is just essentially using that one data set, but that one data set could be compiled from a number of sources. So it really just depends. And yes, also in addition to be able to add your own data sets, we'll always take your suggestions. If there's data sets that we should include, yeah, by all means, reach out and let us know. There is a question about, can we share the presentation? Yes, absolutely. So after this, all the registrants for this webinar will receive an email. So you'll be able to contact us via that. There will also be a link to this webinar, so you will be able to go back, reference it, and view that. Is seismic fault data included in Pivot's data layers? Also gas pipeline data set, and is it available for all states? Yes.
So, oh, I just made my presentation go away. I was trying to show the data
sets
slide I had, but my presentation appears to have just crashed. It's a black screen on my side. So, but yes.
So I can bring that up, and let's see here. Let's see if I can do this. If you want, I can share mine.
Share yours. Mine just crashed.
Screen. Went back to the beginning, so I'll go to the data sets here. But yes, we do have, Pivot does have fault line data sets, as well as, so you'll see in our energy infrastructure, we do have existing pipelines, we have transmission line data, fiber optic cable data sets. Within the geotechnical, we do have fault area and fault lines. that you have access or they would have access to. So yeah, there is a number of layers. And yes, it is for the entirety of the United States. So Pivot doesn't provide data outside the United States, but all of our data sets pretty much would have full US coverage where available. So if it's possible that we're only pulling from certain sources, like you can see here for state level species, some of this here
Oh,
might only
JJ,
be,
you're
but
not sharing your screen, I believe.
we'll let you know. What's that?
I don't think you're sharing your screen right now.
Is it not showing up? I've been doing all this and not showing. Oh, I did the same thing you did, which is to get it all going and then forget to hit that little blue button
Yeah,
for
there we go.
share as
Now
I'm
I can see your
talking
screen.
through. But yes, so now you can see fault area, fault lines. You can see different things like, so if it is just less than full national coverage, we'd call that out. But then you can also see that we have pipelines and a number of other data sets as well.
I don't think we have any other questions right now, but if anybody ever has any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Rob Hernandez, like we said before. We can give you all tutorials. We can show you, further in depth the data sources we have, types of products we've created at Terracon using Pivvot, or help you out using Pivvot yourself. There's a variety of options out there.
Yeah, and we
And
also offer trials. So if anybody wants to test some of this out, we can have those conversations and conduct a trial as well. So yeah, just feel free to reach out and we can have a conversation. Well, with that, I will just say thank you all very much. Again, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where in the United States you are located. Ben, thank you very much for your time and that presentation. And like I said, everybody will get an email following this. Feel free to reach out and follow up with any questions.